Okay, bienvenidos todos. Welcome all. A special welcome to anyone who loves mountains. Because this exhibition really is from the Cordillera. It's a mountain chain that extends from Alaska down through southern Mexico. Then there's another chain that extends down through South America. It's this wonderful, ragged, igneous rock that has been a homeland for many peoples. Some who have been pushed up there, but some who have voluntarily gone there. And it's a very hardy, wonderful culture who lives in those mountains all along. So I am with Jordan Ann Craig, whose work is behind me. Jordan Ann Craig has two ancestries, one Northern Cheyenne, also big mountain people, a very strong culture, and her father is another culture, the Viking culture from Norway and Sweden. So I love this combination. You could take two strong cultures in the world and put them together, and this is the product. Of course, she is working very much with the Southwest culture, but she will explain that to us in a moment. Why Portal? This is Portal 2. It's a gateway. It's a gateway into other cultures, for one, but it is a gateway into how our mind works and with what thought forms we are working. Both of these cultures are very interested in higher states, different states of being, and I think that's why I have chosen them, to understand what that means for us. And we'll go into that in a minute. Jordan.
Hello.
Welcome, and welcome to all of her family who's with her today. Thank you very much for coming to support the gallery and to support her. I'm very interested in the origins of things, and I'm wondering, I know this is a big question for you because you have many stories to tell about the origin, but would you please tell us a bit about yourself and how you originated these works?
Thank you, Chili. So I feel like in this exhibition, I have three origins of the work. So starting to the right, we have these dot paintings, which are specifically from land, memory, and more like meditation in process. So I like to call them memory landscapes, and I have a thought in mind when I make them, and then I just think about that and listen to stories and podcasts and music, and then I execute that. But I always have some type of thought in my mind when I'm making those pieces. Oh, and then that one to the very left. And then right behind us, I'm also studying Cheyenne and Northern Cheyenne beadwork. So I like to dive into different collections and study works that came way before me, and also contemporary work. And then I look at these different designs and I pick ones I'm really drawn to, and then I like to take that original design and abstract it into my own language and into my own abstracted design. But they still have the sense and maybe some of the color combinations intact. And then finally, in the farther room in the gallery, we can see some of my Pueblo-inspired pieces. So I had the honor of doing the School for Advanced Research Fellowship in 2018. And here they have one of the largest collections of Pueblo pottery in the entire world. And it's incredible. My mom and I got to go our first day and have a tour, and it's just it's an amazing space. The room is just alive, like just so many shelves of these incredible pots, all very similar colors. Tans, deep clay reds, black on black pottery. So first time really being engaged with that type of work. And as a fellow, I would study the pottery, and I only stuck to pottery because it was just so many. There's like over 6,000 pots. So I was like, okay, I'll stick with this, and then I would take those original three-dimensional objects and then either maybe repeat a certain aspect from the pot or kind of just abstract the whole design in general and then make these larger two-dimensional paintings and then prints. So those are kind of the breakdown of the three origins of this body of work.
Are there symbolic meanings, or are they completely abstract?
I would say each of them, in the original pottery, for instance, have symbolic meanings that I wouldn't even be able to understand, and even Pueblo people wouldn't necessarily know the original. Every tribe has so many different secrets and different symbols of their own. So I would never try to really dive into those because those were not my own. So I would make my own stories. So the largest print is called New Home. And that one, I mean, I could see the eagle feathers in the original design. I could
That
see, yes, that one over there. And you could see it in person over there. And it's on the back of the brochure as well, the catalog. So, you could see the rain lines and different symbolic aspects. But to me, I kind of felt like those triangle structures were homes or things that you could place yourself inside or protect yourself. And that was my first time living by myself ever. I mean, I shared a room with my sisters growing up most of my life, and I've always had roommates, and I still mostly have roommates to this day, although not right now, I think about it. But that was my first time living by myself. So I wanted to make this piece to commemorate my first time living by myself and having to kind of deal with loneliness and, being safe on your own and having your own shelter. Through the fellowship, they gave me a really nice house, but I was able to kind of characterize those feelings in that piece, New Home.
For those of you who may not be familiar with Santa Fe, it is in an area where largely Spanish is spoken. It is where also many tribal groups are located, and of course gringos come in. But it's a very high energy place. Oh, it has been recognized that way for a long time. And it has the oldest house in the United States, because when Coronado came there, he built some buildings, and he left a core of people there who spoke Spanish of his time, 15th century, and those words are still used today. And so when you compare people who are from Spain and people who are in Santa Fe, they speak quite differently. I think like Americans and British. Their words are completely different. So Santa Fe is where indeed I saw Jordan's work in a very prominent old hotel in Santa Fe called La Fonda, where she had all of her work in display. And then I met her here because she was visiting London at the time. But you're on another residency now.
I am in Roswell, New Mexico. And I know a few of you know that's like famous for UFOs and whatnot, but they also have an incredible artist in residence program. It's oldest of the west of Mississippi. It's been around since the 60s. And I live on a compound with 5 other fellows. So we have all our own homes with spare rooms, and then we have an attached studio that's massive and beautiful. So an incredible opportunity. For an entire year, I am funded to just make as many works as I want, or I don't have to do anything. They're very supportive in whatever you want to do. I know a lot of the artists come from like high intense New York or wherever they are, and they just want to sleep for 2 months. Or they end up, taking on full, they're meet like different concepts. It's just, it's an amazing place. So there's a wood shop, there's a printmaking studio, and then I have my own individual shop as well. So, yeah.
Both Roswell and Santa Fe are in the high, 2,000 meters high, and they're in the desert. So water is scarce. It's the same rainfall as northern Mexico is, where the Huichol live. So we have similar properties, and also they have high pine forest if you go up high enough, as well as Santa Fe.
Luckily, we're not as high altitude though, because Santa Fe is really high up. Is it 7,000 feet?
2,000 meters.
Yeah.
So it's about 6,000.
Yeah, it's really high altitude. Even when I go to Santa Fe now, it's a 3-hour drive, but you just climb the whole time, and then I always feel kind of altitude sick for a few days.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, it's really intense. You go upstairs and you kind of feel out of breath.
I would like to talk about the effect of Jordan's work. When I what if our premises would be, let's just take for an example, ecstasy is man's natural state. So in my mind, the Richo paintings are diagrams. They show the different energies, they show how everything is connected to everything else. And they talk about man and the spiritual beings, the deities. They also talk about the animal world. And there are, of course, three primary: corn, peyote, and deer, which for them is a triumvirate. But when I look in Jordan's work, the eye does something very different. Here I'm looking, I go all over that painting. But when I look at Jordan's work, I can't find a center. So my eye relaxes and my eye expands. It's almost like being in the Southwest. Your eye expands to the vast horizons in the distance, and seeing the mountains up high. It's such an interesting phenomenon. It's almost like this is a diagram to get to ecstasy, and I'm talking about maybe an other kind of higher state. But this, you just zoom in. Any comments?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, I think with how I naturally am drawn to compositions, I like that expansive, from here to the end, it just goes out, and it could be, this can keep going, this could be a wallpaper that takes up the entire wall, and that would be a project I'm really interested in doing. And also with my dot paintings too, there's not really a focal point, and I try to keep it like that. I don't like there to be, something that is distracting. I like the eye to be really happy and content and just kind of, you can get lost in it, and it's not necessarily, you might be able to follow the lines, and there is structure, a lot of horizontal structure in my work, or even a grid, but I like these, almost like you're in a plane and you have these aerial views. That's how I kind of view these compositions. So, and I used to do these very structural pieces, so very central composition, maybe even no background. And I've gotten away from that, but I still sometimes like that. Although with these patterned pieces, I think it's really important that it doesn't have anything really distracting, and it's just expansive, and your eye can kind of follow it the way it wants to.
Does anyone else have a comment on that when you see the work? Sorry. How does it affect you when you look at those patterns?
It's interesting because I find in the blue one, I find that in the blue work, I can only go in a little bit, and then I'm being pushed back out, and I start again in front of the white, which is fine. It's just for me, it's an interesting experience. So I find I'm trying relatively much on the surface, whereas I can immerse myself more in the memoryscapes, almost imaginary landscapes that the eye can expand. But it's a little bit more open to penetration, I find, than this particular work. That's my experience. Microphone works.
It seems not to be loud enough. Okay. How's that? Is that better? Yeah.
I thank you. They're beautiful works. I didn't know the work, and I saw this piece, and similarly I felt that this has a very a kind of radial, curved sort of physics about it. You look at it and it instantly starts to bend time, so I kind of connect this with colour and time. And I see that this artist, I was looking at this and it hit me straight away, so it's really knockout. And I looked at this other piece, another artist with the threads, and I was thinking of your statement about the beadwork, and I noticed very quickly that this is more of an axial kind of physics. So in some sense, looking down, and I connected with that in your comments about looking down. Thank you.
Jordan Ann graduated as a valedictorian from Dartmouth. That means a lot to most Americans if they know Dartmouth. It's one of the most hard schools to get into first, and then to be top of her class is extraordinary. Studying psychology and art, what was there a choice that really you had to make at one point, or was it easy for you?
I think, well, I was the valedictorian in my Indigenous Native class, but so,
Okay.
although it's still a very big deal, but
Maybe a bigger deal.
yeah, and also at my art class too. Yeah, I was the valedictorian. So, and I think I was lucky to get placed, or I got off the wait list of this collage class taught by Esme Thompson, and it just changed the way I thought about academics, about art, everything, you know. First time studying the figure, first time really thinking about collage the way I was taught and learning. So after that class, I took an art class every term except for one my entire college career. So there was really no question after that class. I knew I was going to be studying art. And then psychology, I just kind of fell into it as well. I've always been interested in the brain, and I think in my works too, you know, psychology is a huge role in how perception and just visual effects. I was really interested in that specific studying. So when we were discussing quickly about, you know, how the eye reads these, I like that from far away, you can't really see that is two colors necessarily. Everything, even from far away, maybe some of the lines become all blurred into a gray. Specifically in that print, I could even see from this angle, those lines become kind of a gray blob as opposed to little lines. And I like playing with how the brain simplifies, and it makes it, even though those are lines, it looks kind of like a middle gray as opposed to little lines. So, and from far away, you might not realize these are all individual dots, and I like playing with that subtlety, and also with the brain. So those, even though I much preferred my art major, the psych major really did help influence some of the perceptive, and also just learning about the science behind the eye was really interesting to me.
Yeah, any further on that? Excellent.
That was a while ago, so. But, yeah, I mean, yeah, just how, even how your brain is crossed and everything, and just, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe specifically I can't list off any facts on the top of my head, but I know I use those things, or I know even when I make the designs and I choose my colors specifically, there has got to be psychological effects to them and how I pair the colors.
Do you have any interest in Bridget Riley's work?
We're gonna go, yeah. We're going on Monday, me and Elizabeth. Yeah, I'm really excited.
She was doing something very similar. She was using geometric patterns. Well, not Bridget Riley. She was using geometric patterns and lots of repetition and so on and so forth. But just as with this one, what looks like a set of straight lines, when the eye wanders around inside the frame, the eye begins to bend it. And it's not something that's in the painting, it's in the way that you see the painting. And the thing that actually interests me most about this Huichol stuff is these Huichol paintings are actually images of another state. They're the images of artists who are trying to draw what they see when they're on peyote. They're drawing a particular state. And on peyote, the world is much more colourful, and the world begins to shimmer, and you see these little auras around things and so on. There's one, it's not in this show, but in the last Huichol show that we did, one of the paintings, as you moved your eye around inside the painting, the yarn work would start to shimmer. One of my big questions, and I couldn't talk to the man who made it, but one of the big questions is, did the artist know when he was making that painting, that he was using optical effects. Because this is, as you say, this is the way the eye and the brain encode the reality. And we don't realise, because we do it all the time, we think we live in a reality, but in fact no, there's a distance, there's a separation. We're always playing with reality. We don't look at everything, we just fill bits in. The brain puts in things that we think we don't need to look at. So that's what happens here. When you look at this, it's all straight, but the tones start to play with the eye, and you start to see twists and shapes and deformations. That's a visual perception problem, which we eliminated. So how much the artist, when you see it in psychology, it's fascinating to me, how much the artist is aware that they can play with those things. I think some of these ritual artists are playing with them. But I don't know, because again, I can't talk. It's great to have somebody who can answer that question. How do you, because Bridget Riley was doing just that. How do you try to bend the observer's perceptive field?
I think since I plan these digitally, so I can go on my computer and play with thickness of line and color, even so subtly I could change that red and or the thickness of the spaces. So I could predict exactly what I'm painting before I paint it. And I think, so these are not super painterly, they're very printerly,
Yes.
but I'm able to play and also just see the effect. The whole effect is not really realized until it's actually painted, but I can kind of play with that and predict it and sense it, and also through just making quite a few different variations of these. So I think through practice and also the fact that I have a tool that lets me play with it and see if these colors or if the composition or if the weight of the different lines is successful before I even have to touch paint. So the idea is like, I know when a piece is done before I've even built my canvas yet. Like I know if it's going to work. This was a little bit more tricky. I've never fully worked in this type of grid structure before, but and I even hired my littlest sister to be my assistant. We were taping for like days. We'd pass the tape and we'd have to make sure everything was relatively straight and whatnot. But so this was a little bit of an experiment, and I was able to kind of get a sense. And it is interesting to see the before and then what happens, because from your computer, you know, you can only see so much, but when you're actually viewing it in person, and I can imagine these even larger. I can get, especially the dot ones too. When I'm in Roswell next, I'm going to be building structures that are 4 times as large or even bigger, and just maybe do a row a day. And so yeah, I think I get a little bit of a cheat with using technology.
But the size of the dots won't change.
The size of the dots won't change unless I change my tool.
Okay.
So, does anyone want to guess what the tool is that I use with the dots?
Q-tip.
Q-tip. So
What?
a Q-tip, like the thing for beauty applications.
Yes.
Or cleaning your ears. Yeah. Yeah, the little Q-tips. And I use them as like little stamps. So, and I think that would be interesting because maybe it won't work, I'm not sure, but I can kind of predict it, and I think it'll just become more, even more subtle, because everything will be even more squished together. But
Well, I'm fascinated that you think you can predict it,
yeah.
because obviously but we're talking about a kind of optical illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So to some extent, everybody's eye works the same way, but at the same time, everybody sees differently.
You're gonna love this.
So you're predicting for somebody else
Right.
what you might see yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to see if it works. Yeah?
Yeah.
You're playing with this.
I am.
Sorry, do the paintings reflect who you are in the terms of they seem quite controlled, or are they you're mad in real life and this is your way, your anti?
I think it would go either way. I've always been described as having a lot of energy. Like when I wake up in the morning, it takes me like 2 seconds to be like, okay, let's go. Whereas I don't need that morning coffee to like switch around my day. I could just kind of be at this level for the most part. If I don't sleep, I also get really bad insomnia too. Then I'm a kind of a zombie. But I do have a lot of energy, and even, and my sister too, we've always just been running around, climbing trees, you know, being bad. My mom put my sister in gymnastics when she was even younger than me because she was, you know, described as being a monkey. So she was just, you know, climbing and just, you know, climb on the back of the car while my mom's driving and just, so and then I actually was the one that took to gymnastics. So I did gymnastics for 10 plus years. And so I think that is actually a pretty good description of who I am, because very committed, very, what's the word, like, disciplined and consistent. Like I had that consistency and that work ethic in me already, and I could just sit down for a long time and just do something and focus on it. Whereas I think that's where me and Madison's personalities kind of split, because she can only sit for a certain amount of time for certain things, or she needs a new challenge. But for me, I could keep doing these. And when I was actually making some of these in her apartment in Oakland this past summer in California, she was like, that's something I could never do. I could never do that. Like, what are you doing? Why? And I was like, I like it. But then she also does things that I could never do. So I think it's an interesting way to think about personality and how even it takes a certain type of person that's going to want to sit dot by dot and do something. And then also like risk, if someone was to smudge it or if I was to drop the Q-tip, it'd be ruined. So it's kind of, I like that pressure and that intensity, but it's also really relaxing to me, and I've kind of gotten used to it. So, but yeah, I would say I have the energy and the consistency and the drive to make these things and to play with them and to play with different colors and risk it maybe not working. And then also with the more rigid ones. And I actually, in one of my critiques in college, the professor called me rigid, and I was so offended. And then I was like, oh, actually, that's actually very true. I'll embrace it. If I like straight lines, I like straight lines. And people have been telling me, Tina, oh, be more flowy. I'm like, oh, that's why I do those. So, yeah, I would say these are definitely, in the creation, very much so my aesthetic and also my personality. And then also symbolically, going back to, sorry, Madison, that pink one, when me and Madison were young, and maybe my mom remembers this better, I was the only one that was allowed to like the color pink, and I liked the pink Power Ranger, I liked everything pink, Beanie Babies. And so when Madison really wanted to like pink, I said, absolutely not, you like yellow. And I just convinced her that she liked yellow. And I was the only one that would be the pink M&M. There was no such thing as a pink M&M, but I wanted to be pink. And then so I wouldn't even let Madison have that. I would give myself eyelashes, she wouldn't get eyelashes. I had to be the girly one. I don't know if it's because I was older or a control freak, but I kind of made her like yellow, and now she actually likes pink a lot more than me. But that piece is called Your Favorite Color is Yellow. And it's clearly not yellow, but it's basically kind of reminiscing about that and just thinking about growth and putting myself back into that time when I remember when I didn't let her like yellow. Like, I remember that, and that's kind of a bad personality trait. But so even though I might not fully be thinking about that the entire time, I mean, I'm also dealing with this hot pink the whole time, and I'm thinking about those times and those memories. So it's, even though they're definitely about land and how formations happen and how canyons and erosion occurs, they're really personal and it's kind of funny sometimes. So that's in how I make them and also how I think about them, they're very personal. Yes, Dee. Let me come with this.
I just wanted to ask you one question about your practice and how you arrived to working how you do today. We have a huge body of print works, and I know you've done print residencies, and I'm wondering, did you always work coinciding with painting and print, or was print first, or how did you ever make sculpture, for instance, or was it always this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was a painting concentration in college, and I think my sophomore year I took all the painting classes, and immediately, that was my second year. And so I fell straight into the painting. And I didn't learn printmaking until my last year in university. So I actually took, I spent an additional summer at college. So we have summer course terms, and So I was older than everyone, but I was able to audit a printmaking course. The professor was like, yes, you can take printmaking as long as you volunteer in film photography. So I was learning film photography, like the week before the students had to do it, I had to kind of do things, and then it was okay, but I ended up just kind of being like, you could do it. All my work became black and white. My print work and my everything, even my paintings became very monochromatic. Being that I was like, I need to eliminate color. Color is so complicated, there's so much you could do in gray. So I was learning mono printing and then also the film photography. And I still shoot some film and it's a lot of fun, but I do that for more fun things. I don't include it into my practice as much as I do with my printing. So, I think right now I'm getting more specific, and also I'm looking at my own culture and also my ancestry to make these things. And it's alleviated a lot of the pressure, because I used to be so abstract that I was like, I don't even know what this is. But I was doing these really, really abstract mono prints. And then I did a residency at Kala Art Institute in Berkeley, California, and I learned screen printing. So the manager just gave me a demo, and I mean, as someone who really loves design, it was the perfect place that I could take these designs that I literally already make on my computer and then make them as precise as possible using that technology and that process. So I would say, and then after I got a full year fellowship to study in print shops across Europe. So I was doing a lot of different printmaking, and I learned cyanotype, and I was doing wood blocks. So I think it works really well with my personality and how I make things, and then also it's a great way to complement the work. And I love making mini versions. So this painting, I mean, it's a one-of-a-kind piece, it's there, but then also there's like, you know, you can get a small version, and it's definitely different how you experience it, but really they're very complementary. So I would say I do both now, and I don't have a preference for one or the other, but I kind of like to make the paintings and then make versions or variations in the print works and play with that. So I'm also going to be playing with some laser cut woodcuts soon. So using that technology, and instead of carving, because I've done that before, carving into wood, I'll have a machine do that for me, and then play with the different compositions I can make and very precisely print wood with that texture. So yeah, I like playing in that realm too.
Does that affect the price at all?
Wait a second, nobody can hear you.
Sorry, just as a professional artist, that's an interesting perspective, this piece and that piece, because of the nature of the abstraction, but it questions a kind of conceptual element about value. So are they all the same price?
The prints are all the same price, all in the edition, and I like to make really small editions, but this one will definitely be the more pricey version, and that's like the baby
But it's
version.
an interesting
Yeah, and I would say as,
thought.
you know, an emerging younger artist, I mean, people my age don't necessarily have homes or space or the budgets to buy a big painting, and they also have to travel with it, or, you know, everyone's kind of bopping around. But then in a print, I mean, it's a way for like younger artists to be able to collect art and support artists and appreciate art in their own homes, and also have the space for it too. So it kind of just opens up the idea of,
There is a oneness.
yeah,
really,
yeah.
In the way
They're definitely like tied together, and they're very much so both of me. But yeah, it is a good way just to have. I mean, I love working on paper too. So
beautiful.
thank you.
So, you spoke a bit about what you intend to do next, but can you elaborate any further? What is your next vision?
Oh, well, I'm gonna actually make another big pink painting. That's on the agenda. I wanna. So a lot of the beadwork has certain elements, and these are kind of just general abstractions. So if you were to see this original Cheyenne pouch, it has these long horizontal stripes with these shapes and these combinations, and so I kind of want to take something very specific. And so I was looking at this one pouch, and it has little triangles, but so many little triangles. So I just want to make a painting with like a million little triangles, and by a million it's probably be like 300 or something. But just so many that the eye also plays with the negative space and the positive space, and just abstracting certain elements of things. I've got some more grid works in the works, and this is specifically about quill work. So manipulating little porcupine quills into a weaving, and this is pre-beads. Before Cheyenne people had access to beads and glass beads, they would literally pluck little porcupine quills, and there's a whole process to it. And so in Cheyenne, people who do quill work are highly regarded people. They're insanely talented, and you know, they get picked and poked, and it's a huge process. So, and also even with the Pueblo pottery, just the process to make a three-dimensional object is intense. And so my paintings are, even though they might be kind of intense too, they're just they're pretty simple compared. The process is more straightforward than all the three-dimensional things that go into sculpture, and quill work I would even say is sculptural. So and they're dyed, there's so many, and I've never even done it, but I could completely admire that process. And so this piece is specifically about red orange dyed quills. It's a naturally dyed piece of work, and that's how. And I was more interested. I was looking at these incredible designs at the Plains Indian Museum collection in Cody, Wyoming, and I was actually more interested in the backgrounds of the design. So you might have like these designs. I was actually more interested in like the blue that was happening in those rows and how the quill was actually put together. So that piece is literally just a celebration of the background of the quill work that we're looking at. And so I think I'll look at more backgrounds and also take apart little shapes. So even looking at like something like this, if I was to make a painting, I would probably go into like one of those flowers and just repeat it. That's kind of how I like to work. I would take something I really admire from one object, and it just, like even like how that moon has that yellow texture. I'm just kind of winging this, but yeah, I would look at that yellow and make a whole painting that's just yellow. And it's got that light yellow and that orange, and it has that wave. But just kind of, yeah, it's kind of an academic way of going about it, taking one little element and really looking at that and studying it. So yeah, I think in the future works. Yeah, I think the future, they're gonna get bigger, and I'll make some smaller too, but playing with the eye, playing with perception, playing with color, and then a lot of repetition.
Does anyone else have any questions, queries, or remarks? John?
Going back in history ways, do you feel any sort of affinity with Mondrian, who started out figuratively and gradually worked into the rectilinear?
I mean, I think I definitely studied Mondrian and I've seen so many of his works. And of course, I think in high school, my mom has showed this picture to like dozens of people this trip, but it's like the picture of the dog, my dog Molly I drew, and it's hyper realistic. And I totally went through that phase. And I mean, I think in art school, even if I'm doing these, still continuing to draw and draw space and draw figures and work on and look at shadows, I think that's still really important. And even though Mondrian left that, I'm sure he's still hyper aware of, the figurative and the literal, and then he makes those shapes because there's important training to that. There's no way you could just start doing that. So I think the same with a lot of artists. They've started very, very specific and picturesque almost, and then they work away from that. And I'm definitely working away from that, but I still have that training I'm really thankful for, and I can still return to when I want to. So, and I think even when you make a portrait, you semi-grid it out and you use that, and you have those elements, so there's crossover.
Yeah. There are a lot of psychological curves in straight lines.
Thank you very much. No, very nice exhibition. I just want to ask you a little bit about your Native American background and how important it is to you. I read this essay by Salman Rushdie, and he talks about how people who are the children of immigrants have a different view of their original culture, which is kind of accentuated, that actually becomes like a hyper version of it, whereas their parents have a kind of a lesser version of it. Is that the case for you, or how do you kind of react to your Native American background?
Very good question, because we didn't get to talk about this yet. So my mom was actually adopted in the 60s. Hi, Mom. So in the 50s and 60s specifically, there was a huge movement to, you know, get rid of Indian and native culture.
What was that?
I mean, what was the saying? Kill the Indian, take, what was it? Do you
I
remember?
don't know.
But I mean,
I
it's,
never memorized that one.
yeah, it's a good one not to memorize. That's why I haven't. But they just wanted to eliminate it. They saw natives as being, you know, savages and just bad. I mean, if they got rid of them, there wouldn't be a problem, you know. And that was what was happening in a contemporary time. My mom's pretty young, and still she was basically not her biological mother wasn't forced to give her up, but pretty much, you know, she was young. They moved her out of her house in the middle of the night. She had the baby, and then the baby she got rid of the baby she gave her up for adoption, and my grandma Jeannie was able to come back home. And so in that time, my mom grew up with an Irish Catholic mother and then a Swedish father, and then they raised 4 native children and then 1 non-native child. And so all different tribes in Montana. And so, but the town itself wasn't really close to a reservation. My mom and her siblings were some of the only natives in that family. They were the native family in town. And so my mom didn't grow up in her Northern Cheyenne culture. She didn't meet her mom until much later, her biological mother, until much later in life. Whereas my grandma is still on the reservation to this day. But yeah, I think even my mom, we're both trying to find this culture. You know, it was taken away from her, and of course it was taken away from us. But really, it's not about me in that way. It was taken from my mom. And so it's really interesting navigating that, because my mom still looks really indigenous. People come up to her, oh, you're native. And in Montana, she couldn't not be native. But culturally, she was raised Catholic, and she, you know, liked to do sports like everyone else. She's very contemporary. And so she just looked a certain way, but and people treated her certain ways. And it was just it was an interesting time, because I didn't have that. I grew up very mixed. My mom has always been thankful that I'm kind of a chameleon. Me and my sisters, we can be whatever we want. People think I'm Dutch, or if I'm in Amsterdam, I could totally be British if I'm here, maybe. But so, whereas my mom couldn't really hide from how she looked in growing up in Montana. So I think this is, and how I make art, it's a way to reconnect with that. It's a way to study it, but it's not necessarily that I've lived it. So I think it's definitely an interesting and not rare history. This happened. People are being taken in the middle of the night, or taken out of their homes and put into foster care, or put into boarding schools, or put into adoptive parents, and that was common, very common. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting essays and documentaries about that. I highly recommend looking more into that, because it's a history that has been very not talked about, and people don't even know about it in the States even. So I think it's now being more discussed, that history of trying to eliminate a whole race.
Anyone else?
Does it make you angry?
I think, and Chili and I were just talking about this, because my mom loved her parents and she loved her family, and she was taken away, but it was a positive experience overall. And it's not like she grew up with really racist, horrible people. So they were like the opposite. So I think I didn't realize until much into my adulthood that, wow, this was a movement that was happening, and my mom was a part of it. So I think, it doesn't really make me angry. I don't think that's the right word. I think it makes me feel like I have a lot of learning to do, and I have a lot of understanding to do, but I also will always feel slightly removed. And I went to a college where, and I went to a high school, so when I was younger, my sister and I were some of the only native children in the schools. In California, it's very diverse though, but still, we didn't really know that many people that were Native. And then when I went to college, where I went to a college that was founded on the education of Native people. So they didn't really, they went back to their original charter much later. They didn't graduate a Native student till long into their founding. But that meant that Dartmouth has more, I think when I was there, it was like 4 or 5% Natives, which was 4 or 5% higher than the average. So, and there was a Native American house and a Native American program, and I had a peer advisor, an academic advisor, and from all different tribes. So I had this new Native community that I never knew I needed or wanted or was a part of, and I was accepted. But you have urban Natives, so people that have never grown up around their tribe like me, and then you have Natives that are never left the reservation and they go to school. So, but we were all able, everyone's got this really wide range of backgrounds, but that was the first Native community I was able to join. And I think now my sister and I, we're starting a Native-made line, and that has been able to connect us with so many other Native artists and activists and models and photographers and videographers, and I think that's been really eye-opening as well, to have a very contemporary take in fashion. And that's been a really eye-opening journey, because we hear all these different stories from all these different people's backgrounds. And then I have my fine art life too, where I'm studying artifacts and also contemporary work and objects.
I guess the real justice would be when we have a Native American president.
Yeah.
Well, as long as she does
Yes.
the job well.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to that.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a lot more Native representation in government, and New Mexico specifically. Yeah, that was huge. So it's pretty great. There's pictures with some of my paintings in the backgrounds of some of them, because they'll have big meetings at La Fonda. So yeah, someone's tagged me some pictures online. Oh, there's Jordan Gray behind Deb. So yeah.
That's good. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I think that you talked about all the young people coming through now from various different backgrounds, urban, and also I think it's binding ancient culture and the very specific way you were talking about your own awakening with the little patterns on the purse and how they were different, and our idea of Native American consciousness. I think the older you get, the closer you see the separation is beyond the personality. It is life, and it's you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Remarks, questions? This is your big chance. Or anything about the show in general. Jesse?
Thanks. Loads and loads of questions. The thing that has actually interested me is when you said that when looking at the Pueblo people's pottery, for example, that you thought it would be appropriation to pick up their appropriation in some sense. Yeah? But then to hear your history, you have a genetic link, let's say, to the Cheyenne, Northern Cheyenne, Southern Cheyenne, which already you have a division there between different groups of the Cheyenne and so on. So it gets complex, the whole question of appropriation, and it's very much a big thing today. But in a sense, we are creatures who work with symbols, with encoding meaning in some form that gets passed on down through the historical process, and we pick it up. So if you know nothing about quill work, or if you know nothing about these particular kinds of patterns, they mean nothing to you. That's also true of Pueblo pottery, that's those symbols. But you can read your way into them. There's a sense, I think, that we have an Algerian artist who talks about the alphabet of memory. That in fact these symbols are so deep. The sun, the moon, you look over here, the sun, the moon, the stars. It's not as though the Northern Cheyenne have got a copyright that only they can use this particular symbol. Same thing happens in Irish culture. The old Aran sweaters. People today can't read the patterns. Didn't mean to say that they weren't encoded in there. So I think there's something which allows anybody, in fact, if you can read your way into them, to try to pull those things out and to interpret them in your own way, maybe. But it's kind of a whole series of questions. The other thing that I'm thinking, listening to you, is that on the back wall here we have the Huicholes. The Huichol are the same thing. The Huichol were a people who were moved away from the conquistadors, who hid up in the hills, and who got so far away from them that they were never really bothered. But today the Huichol have got Canadian mining companies who are coming into their hills because they want to mine what's under those hills. So they've been moved around by the huge force of civilization. And exactly the same thing happened to the American Indian peoples. They were moved around by an invading force. They were put on reservations and so on and so forth. So appropriation and how you react to that historical fact. In a sense, the Huichol is saying, look, we're still here. These things are saying, and we're still talking about the native consciousness and the consciousness of nature. In a sense, you're saying the same things too. Look at the maps of look at the contours of the country. This is my country. How do you feel with those guys, and how do you feel about? I suppose I want you to appropriate this stuff. I want you to put this stuff out. I want you to go and find these things and create something that's a syncretism of who you are as an American, a modern American, and these ancient cultures that come together there.
I think you said it with, we are still here. That's the thing. There's people that don't believe that Native Americans still exist. Literally, I've had friends that are like, oh no, they're gone. And it's like, oh, like I had a friend who's an actor, and he's like, no, I'm here, and the guy didn't believe him. They're on set. And it was really, really appalling. But I think with these works, it is saying, like, we are still here. People are still making quill work. People are still beading. People are still beading on pouches, and they're beautiful. And same with these works, too. These are practices and different levels of consciousness that are still occurring in these sacred situations. So, and I think I'm always very hyper aware of appropriation. And I think that's finally now our world is becoming more aware in fashion and even just buying different products. People don't want to buy appropriated things anymore so much, I hope. But I think in terms of my paintings, they are a way for people to appreciate the past and also the very contemporary. And so, and I've had other quill workers that could see this piece and they're like, I get that, I see it. And I've had like a Laguna, an Acoma Parter came over to me and she says, can I paint your design on my pot now? And that was like, okay, I'm doing something okay, because that's a huge honor. And I'm also part Zuni, which is Pueblo in New Mexico, but and I was actually more interested in Acoma and Laguna and their rigid, structural, perfect patterns. Like where Zuni was like they're more whimsical and like more curves, and I just immediately was drawn to the other parts of the room. So I think when that one artist said to me, "Can you send me your design and can I try to paint it back?" And she only meant it in like the highest honor, and that was like, okay, this is good. And I think when I show these works, it is really important to see the original pots. Yeah. So I'll have to get images to you, because the original pots, and then you see it, and then you could appreciate it so much more. So it's nice when I do a talk when I can have those images, and you could see where I like that. There's one print on this wall called Teeth, and it's a really rusty colored pot, and it has that shape. And I was told that is maybe a mountain, maybe a cloud. And I was like, that looks like a tooth. It's a tooth. And so I just took that, I isolated that shape, just like I've been talking about, and I repeated it in a pattern, in the same pattern how it was displayed, how it it changed this way, then this way, then this way. So I basically isolated it and made it its own little pattern, called it teeth. It's tooth.
What about Aboriginal painting?
Oh, that's been hugely influential too, with just the mark of the dot. When I saw a huge Aboriginal show, my first year in university as well, and I was like, I mean, anyone who goes to those shows and spends time, you're just blown away by the color, by just the dots, and just the concept of these dreams being in landscapes and all. Amazing.
But maybe that's my point. That you can borrow Aboriginal painting dot technique without appropriating anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this we all come from the same source.
Yeah.
Is this the idea of better memory is that it doesn't belong to Cheyenne or the Zulu or that it's common to humanity, and you're simply reflecting it in the contemporary moment.
Yeah.
So yes, you can mix these things.
I think so too. It's interesting because I was on residency in Venice, Italy, and an Australian artist was like, well, these are clearly Aboriginal in terms of inspiration, yes. And I was like, yeah, definitely, there's influence and there's credit to that. And she says, well, you're an Indigenous woman, you could do that, but I could never do that. And she's from Australia. Yeah. So I think there's still definitely a line that I have to think about and be conscious of. And I think also that's why I've adopted my own way of viewing and creating the dots, that I'm not necessarily like making these maps of dreams, and I totally tried to do that once and it was really fun. But I think I've made it into my own language, just as these as well, even though they might have Cheyenne or Northern Cheyenne beginnings. You won't necessarily see something exactly like this out there. So I think it's mic down, sorry. So yeah, I think that's where I might be pushing it. And I have a peer Northern Cheyenne artist and friend. His name is Ben Peace, and we are both on fellowship. We both got a grant at the same time, and we're at a conference, and we are all sitting and talking. And he said, "You're so brave. You're so brave. You're so abstract." Because he makes these pieces that are also incredibly amazing, but he'll do like photo transfers, and his work is very political and very just he'll paint around them and make these really incredible pieces. But then you've got a piece like mine, which might be from an idea, but it's abstracted. And so when he said, "You're so brave for doing that," I wish I could do that. It's like, well, I wish I could do what you're doing. So I think it's been interesting meeting other Northern Cheyenne artists, Aboriginal artists, non-Aboriginal artists from Australia, and just seeing their point of views, because the word appropriation is something I'm always thinking about and worried about.
You're worried about it?
I am sometimes.
Well, this makes me think of Chinese.
Now you have to speak very loudly so our sound engineer can hear. Please, go ahead.
No, I'm just interested in your sense. I understand why you're sensitive to it, but I think we just have to. You're living in a world where you're being taught things about so many different cultures all the time. We're living in a world where cultural homogenization is taking place. We need to be moving upstream from there and going back towards some of these. This is what this artist is saying, I think. We need to be thinking about the sun and the moon and the stars and nature, and not be so locked up in our big city-states and our political ideas and our Brexit and this and that. We need to be thinking about this, because that's the important reality. Now, you have to take peyote to go to Mexico and take peyote to learn that. There's a problem, because half of mankind isn't thinking like that anymore. So we need to be putting out these essentially old ideas and old shapes and old forms, and talk about them, well, however you do, symbolically. So appropriation, I don't think.
Yeah.
In the long history of the human race, everything can be regarded as appropriation, if you want to look at it that way. I could conceive of arguments among different tribes of Native Americans accusing each other of having stolen their culture.
Yeah.
It goes back forever. There is no humanity without continuity, and continuity is the essence of culture.
Yeah. Well said.
And appropriation is the ethics of transmission.
Okay, we're just at the end. I could take one more remark, brief. If not, I thank Jordan very much for being with us and flying all this way from Mexico.